He said the mountain never scared him. Not the cliffs, not the storms, not even the night he heard footsteps outside the lodge when no one should have been there. What terrified him was the moment Diesel stopped breathing beside him, just for a heartbeat, as if the dog had taken the danger into his own lungs. Jacob didn't know it then, but that was the night a forgotten crime, a buried fortune, and a soldier's last promise began clawing their way back to the surface. And it all started with a dog who refused to let the truth die quietly. The wind hit the cliffside like an old warning as Jacob Harris drove the last mile into Crystal Rise. The snowfall wasn't heavy, but it carried the kind of cold that seeped into bone and memory. His truck rattled up the narrow pass, tires spitting ice, engine grumbling like it resented the climb as much as he did. Beside him, Diesel sat tall and silent, a dark outline against the white world outside. The dog's amber eyes never blinked, never drifted. He watched the mountain the way a soldier watches a battlefield. Jacob rubbed a hand across his face. 7 years out of the military, and the mountains still looked more familiar than any house with a front lawn. He'd thought he left the ghosts overseas. Turned out they knew how to follow. Crystal Rise appeared the way small towns always did in winter. Lights dim, smoke curling from chimneys, and judgment sharper than the cold. 3 men stood outside the gas station as Jacob drove past. One lifted his chin in recognition. The others smirked. The prodigal soldier returns. Jacob thought. And they're already taking bets on how long I last. He didn't blame them. He barely believed he was back. 10 minutes later, the road ended at the place that had dragged him up the mountain in the first place. Hanging Cliff Lodge. It clung to the rock face like it was trying not to fall, its roof bowed under old winters, its porch slanted toward the abyss. Icicles hung like teeth from the eaves. Half the windows were boarded, the other half were cracked. Jacob stepped out into the cold, boots sinking deep. Diesel leapt down beside him, nose immediately in the air. The dog's breath came out steady, controlled. Home, Jacob murmured, but the word didn't fit. Not yet. He made it 2 steps toward the porch before Diesel stiffened. Tail up, ears sharp. His body snapped into alert tension, the kind Jacob had learned never to ignore. Diesel drifted toward the cliff's edge, sniffing the crusted snow in a slow, methodical pattern. Jacob frowned. Hey, not that way. Too close. Diesel didn't stop. He moved with purpose, paws pressing into untouched powder. Then he barked once, short, hard, commanding. Jacob followed fast. He'd heard that bark before. Afghanistan, Kandahar, the convoy, a bomb he never saw. Diesel did. That bark had saved 10 lives. When he reached the dog, he saw what Diesel had found. A thin fracture in the snow, a patch where the ice didn't sit quite right. Jacob knelt, scraping away until metal glinted beneath the pale surface. A hinge. Rusted. Frozen shut, a trapdoor. He stared at it, pulse quickening. A trapdoor didn't belong this close to a cliff unless someone wanted it hidden. Before he could test it, the crunch of tires echoed up the road. A beat-up Ford idled by the gate. 2 locals leaned out the window. Well, I'll be damned. One said, the Harris kid really came back. The other laughed. Inherited a death trap on a cliff and thought it was a blessing. Jacob didn't rise, didn't respond. Diesel planted himself between Jacob and the truck, hackles raised, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. The men hesitated. Everyone in Crystal Rise knew the stories. Retired K9, decorated, scarred, loyal to a fault. The Ford backed away. Only when the engine noise faded did Diesel relax. Jacob exhaled slowly. Good boy, he whispered. But his eyes stayed on the trapdoor. Inside the lodge the air felt colder than the outside. Dust coated everything. The silence was thick, almost waiting. Jacob set his duffel down, lit an old lantern, and walked through the rooms. The wood groaned under each step. On the mantel lay a single envelope, yellowed, edges curled, his name inked along the front. Jacob froze. He hadn't been here since he was 12. Uncle Ray had always been a strange man, but not careless. If he left a letter, it meant something. Jacob opened it carefully. If you're reading this, the mountain finally called you home. The lodge is older than you think, and smarter than people give it credit for. Trust the dog. He'll find what you're meant to finish. Jacob looked up. The lantern flame flickered. Trust the dog. Diesel nudged his leg, as if on cue. All right, Jacob murmured. What am I not seeing? He explored deeper into the lodge while Diesel circled the walls, sniffing corners, scanning window frames with that quiet intensity only a working dog carried. Then Diesel stopped, head high, nose twitching. He sprinted back outside. Jacob cursed and followed. The cold hit him like a shove. Diesel raced toward the trapdoor again, digging hard now, snow flying behind him. Jacob knelt beside him. They uncovered the full outline. A heavy metal hatch bolted into stone. Too new to be part of the original lodge. Too old to be harmless. Jacob gripped the rusted handle. It didn't move, but something else did. A soft metallic sound beneath them. A shift. A vibration. Like something mechanical deep below the cliff had just awakened for the first time in decades. Diesel snarled, stepping in front of Jacob, staring at the cliff's edge as if something down there was staring back. Jacob swallowed hard. What the hell did my uncle bury out here? The mountain wind rose, scraping snow across the ledge, whispering through pine needles like a warning he was too late to hear. Behind him, the lodge stood crooked against the sky. Before him, the trapdoor waited, and beside him, Diesel, the only one who seemed to understand the danger they'd just stepped into. Jacob's breath fogged the air. Tomorrow, he whispered. We open it tomorrow. Diesel didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared into the snow ledge as if he already knew what was buried deep inside. Morning came quietly on the cliff, the sky washed in a pale blue that never quite felt warm. Jacob stood on the porch with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Sleep hadn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, the memory of the trapdoor flashed behind them. And each time, Diesel stood, paced, then rested again with a growl low in his chest, as if he sensed something Jacob couldn't name yet. The town woke early. So did its whispers. Jacob made the trip into Crystal Rise for supplies. The bell over the hardware store door chimed as he stepped inside. Conversation died instantly. 3 men by the counter exchanged looks. The oldest, a wiry man in a flannel jacket, smirked. Back from the dead, huh, Harris? Another laughed under his breath. Or back to join him? Jacob pretended not to hear, focusing on a coil of rope in his hands, but their voices pricked his nerves like needles. In the service, disrespect came from fear. Here, it came from ignorance, a worse poison. He paid and left without a word. Diesel waited in the truck bed, tail thumping once before going still again. The dog rarely wagged without purpose. Jacob scratched behind his ear. Yeah, I get it. Let's go. The drive back to the lodge twisted upward, through pines still heavy with snow. Jacob caught himself glancing at the rear-view mirror more often than usual. A shadow moved behind the trees at one turn. A truck idled by a ridge on another. Probably nothing, but his instincts didn't like coincidences. When he reached the lodge, Diesel jumped out before the truck stopped rolling. He trotted straight to the north side of the structure, nose glued to the earth. Jacob followed, rope slung over his shoulder. Diesel circled the same spot again and again until he stopped at a patch of earth where frost had thinned. He lowered his head, sniffed deep, then pawed gently. Not frantic, not uncertain. Precise. Jacob knelt, Beneath the dog's paws, wood fibers stuck out from the cold dirt. Not part of the foundation, separate, hidden. Another entrance. Great, Jacob muttered. How many secrets did you leave behind, Uncle Ray? He dug with Diesel, clearing earth and snow until the outline of a hatch appeared. Old, reinforced, but built with intention. A faint emblem was burned into the wood. Jacob brushed his thumb across it. The Cold War Engineering Corps insignia. A unit Jacob had only heard about during briefings. The kind of unit trained to build structures meant to be forgotten. He sat back, stunned. What the hell was this place used for? Diesel's head jerked suddenly towards the tree line. He growled. A low, deep warning that vibrated through Jacob's ribs. Jacob froze. He followed Diesel's stare. Someone stood halfway, behind a pine trunk, just far enough away that the face was hidden. A silhouette. Watching. Jacob rose slowly, muscles coiled. Hey. The figure stepped back, snow crunching underfoot, then disappeared between the trees. No panic, no rush, just a slow retreat, as if he only came to confirm something. Diesel barked once and lunged forward, ready to chase. Jacob grabbed his harness. No, stay. Diesel resisted for a heartbeat, then stopped beside him, chest still heaving, eyes locked on the woods. Jacob's stomach tightened. He scanned the tree line again, but nothing moved. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were scouting him, watching his lodge, watching the exact ground where Diesel had found a hidden hatch. Jacob pushed air out of his chest, the cold bit sharper than before. Inside the lodge, he lit the wood stove and pulled out the box of belongings the lawyer had returned to him after Uncle Ray's estate was settled. Pictures, tools, a stack of letters he never opened. He tore through them now, searching for anything that made sense. Anything that connected a harmless mountain lodge to military insignias and strangers in the woods. He found a photograph near the bottom, his uncle, standing with two other men in heavy winter gear. Behind them, the lodge looked new, not decayed, not forgotten. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, a sign read, Northern Relay Point 7, not a lodge, a relay point, built for transmitting or storing something, something worth hiding. Jacob's pulse ticked faster. He flipped the photo over. A short note was scribbled in pencil. If something happens, tell Jacob the truth. The date was 3 weeks before Uncle Ray died. A skiing accident, the town said. Slipped on a ridge. Body found at the base of a rock face. But the ridge in the photo was the same ridge where the stranger had just watched him from the trees. Jacob set the photo down, hands growing still. It wasn't an accident. Someone wanted it to look like one. He looked at Diesel. The dog was sitting now, eyes locked on him as if waiting for him to catch up to a truth Diesel had known from the moment they arrived. Jacob reached for the rope, the tools, the lantern. Let's open that hatch. Diesel stood at once, but before Jacob touched the wooden door, a crack echoed across the cliff. A sound too sharp, too deliberate to be the wind. Gunfire. Far, but closing. Jacob ducked instinctively. Diesel pressed himself against Jacob's side, teeth bared, body trembling with controlled fury. Jacob whispered, barely audible, a soldier's instinct cutting through the fear. We're not alone on this mountain. And Uncle Ray didn't die, the way they said. Diesel didn't move, didn't blink. He was ready. And so was Jacob. The storm rolled in without warning, a white wall swallowing the sky, the trees, the ledge, everything. One moment the mountain was quiet, the next it was raging like it wanted to tear the cliff from its roots. Jacob barely had time to latch. The shutters before the wind slammed against the lodge with a force that rattled the beams. Diesel paced in front of the door, ears pinned forward, tail stiff, body tight. Not fear. Focus. The same focus he had in the desert before everything went wrong. Jacob slipped on his coat. You hear something?" Diesel didn't bark. He just looked at the back door, then at Jacob, then back again. A silent command. "All right, show me." The moment Jacob opened the door, the cold punched him in the face. Snow whipped sideways, reducing the world to a blur of white. Diesel pushed through it with absolute certainty. Jacob followed the dog's dark silhouette, trusting him more than his own eyes. The dog cut across the frozen yard, then toward the far side of the cliff, where a line of jagged boulders formed a partial shelter. The snow drifted thick around them, but Diesel dug fast, claws biting through ice. Jacob knelt to help, fingers numbing instantly. Then metal appeared, a steel panel, partly buried, partly iced over, bigger than the hatch near the lodge, built into rock instead of wood. And old, military old. Diesel growled low, stepping back. Jacob pulled out his knife and chipped at the ice until he found the handle. A round lock, ancient and frozen solid. He braced himself and pulled. With a scraping groan, the metal door cracked open, releasing a breath of stale, trapped air that smelled of rust and forgotten time. The space inside was narrow but tall enough to crouch. Diesel ducked in first, nose twitching. Jacob followed, lantern in hand. The storm outside muffled instantly, replaced by the thick hush of a sealed bunker. On the wall hung a rusted shelf lined with containers and binders. Jacob brushed snow from the nearest one and pried it open. Inside lay folded maps, edges brittle with age. He held them up to the lantern. Elevation lines, coordinates, a series of red X's along the ridge, each accompanied by codes. Diesel nudged another crate. Jacob opened it and froze. A handwritten notebook, blackened with time. Technical diagrams, lists of materials. A name stamped on the inside cover. Ridge Vault Engineering Log, 1983. Jacob felt his pulse quicken. He flipped pages. Diagrams of underground storage channels. Notes about reinforced tunnels. Internal memos containing warnings. The last sentence on one page was underlined twice. If the vault is compromised, relocate reserves to the secondary cliff conduit. He whispered the words aloud. Reserves, not supplies, not equipment. Something valuable enough to hide in the tunnels of a mountain. He set down the notebook and opened another binder. Operation Ridge Vault. Confidential. Cold War Asset Protection. His breath caught in his throat. Uncle Ray had been part of this. Diesel let out a short, sharp bark. Not alarm. Urgency. Jacob looked up. The dog stood at the door of the bunker, nose pointing outward, his body frozen into a tense silhouette. The storm howled outside, but through the swirling snow Jacob saw it. Footprints, fresh, leading up to the bunker, then stopping. Whoever made them didn't enter. They watched, then retreated into the storm. Someone knew about this place. Jacob extinguished the lantern and crouched beside Diesel, heartbeat climbing. The wind masked everything, but not enough to hide the truth. There was a second set of prints farther away. Lighter, narrower, a single person. They had been followed here. Jacob stepped out of the bunker, scanning the trees beyond the white curtain. He couldn't see shapes, only movement. Enough to know someone was still out there. Diesel pressed against his leg, silent, waiting for the decision. Jacob grabbed the steel door and pulled it shut. It sealed with a dull echo that felt final, almost ceremonial. Snow already began covering the footprints, erasing the evidence as fast as the storm could bury it. He whispered to Diesel, "They're not just watching. They're looking for the same thing." The dog turned toward the lodge, muscles coiled, ready to run. Inside, Jacob spread the maps across the old dining table. Diesel stood beside him, eyes shifting between the papers and the windows, as if guarding both. Snow hammered the roof like fists. Jacob traced the largest red X on the map. It aligned almost perfectly with the coordinates behind the lodge, near the snow ledge where Diesel first found the hidden hatch. Secondary cliff conduit, vault relocation site. His uncle didn't die in an accident. He died protecting something. Jacob closed the notebook, mind racing. Tomorrow they would uncover what Ray Harris never finished. But tonight the storm had the last word. And in that storm, Jacob sensed a truth he did not want to admit. He was no longer the only one who knew what slept beneath the mountain. Diesel lifted his head suddenly and growled at the darkened window, teeth bared, body trembling with alertness. Jacob followed his gaze. A shadow moved across the glass, then vanished. The storm did not ease through the night. It shifted, curled, and thickened, the way mountain storms do when they have unfinished business. By early afternoon, visibility had dropped to mere feet. Jacob stood at the window, watching the snow pulse against the glass in frantic bursts. Then Diesel barked, not the low growl he used for warning, not the clipped bark for discovery. This bark was urgent and sharp, the kind he used when someone's life hung in the balance. Jacob grabbed his coat before the second bark finished echoing. Diesel was already at the door, pawing once, then sprinting into the whiteout the moment Jacob opened it. "Stay with me, Diesel," Jacob muttered as he plunged after the dog. Diesel's shape cut a dark path through the storm, weaving between drifts and boulders as if he could see through the white. Jacob followed the prints, boots sinking deep. The cold clawed at his lungs. Then he saw her, a figure curled near a fallen tree, one arm half buried in snow, the other shielding her face from the wind. Her coat was too thin, her breathing shallow. She lifted her head as Diesel pressed against her side, shielding her from the wind. Jacob dropped to his knees. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but focused enough to speak. "I got turned around. Thought the storm would pass." Diesel nudged her neck gently, checking for responsiveness, then licked her cheek once before pushing closer. His warmth steadied her. Jacob wrapped her arm over his shoulder. "Let's get you inside." The return was slow, each step carved against the wind, but Diesel stayed ahead, checking the path, circling back, then leading again like a seasoned guide. By the time they reached the lodge, Jacob's fingers had gone numb and the woman's lips were turning blue. Inside, the fire roared to life, blankets stacked, water boiling. The woman warmed slowly, her shivering easing as color returned to her cheeks. "Name's Jacob Harris," he said. She exhaled shakily. "Leah Monroe. I teach at the school in town, or I did until I decided hiking in a storm was a good idea." Diesel sat inches from her, eyes locked on her face, not blinking. She smiled weakly. "He stayed with me. He tends to do that." Later, when the storm finally settled into a quieter rhythm, Leah walked the lodge with curiosity, trailing her hand along dusty shelves and warped frames. Jacob watched her from the fireplace as he sifted through the Ridgevault documents again. Her voice came from the hallway. "Jacob? Is this supposed to be loose?" He joined her. She held a framed photograph halfway lifted from the wall. Behind it, wedged into a narrow groove in the wood, was a folded sheet of brittle paper sealed in a clear sleeve. Jacob's heart kicked hard. He peeled it free and set it on the kitchen table. It unfolded like something that had been waiting years to breathe. A map, hand-drawn, old ink fading but still legible. Jacob traced the lines slowly. The ridge, the lodge, the elevation markings, and then, near the northern cliff face, a symbol marked with an X in red pencil. Leah pointed. "That's the same symbol on the maps you found in the bunker." Jacob nodded. "And look at the date." She leaned closer. 1984. Leah frowned. "That was the year your uncle—" Jacob didn't finish her sentence. He didn't need to. Diesel walked to the table, nose hovering over the red X, then pressed his paw onto the wood and stared at Jacob. Leah blinked. "I think he's trying to tell you something. He's been trying since day one." Jacob flipped the map over. Scribbled in the corner was a note. "North Tunnel sealed." Crawford insisted. "Only Ben knows why." Leah straightened. "Crawford. As in Ben Crawford? The guy who practically owns half the valley?" Jacob's jaw tightened. He found the name earlier in the Ridge Vault logs, but seeing it here felt different. He'd always heard rumors about Ben. Old money. Old power. The kind that didn't retire, just hid behind handshakes and real estate. Leah looked uneasy. Why would he be part of a Cold War storage project? Jacob didn't answer. He picked up the map again, examining the ridge's contours. The sealed entrance sat directly above a narrow ledge of rock that jutted out like a spine. Hard to reach, harder to notice, perfect for hiding something no one should ever find. A sudden gust hit the window, shaking the glass. Diesel jerked his head toward the door and growled deep. Jacob moved fast. He opened the door, lantern in hand, scanning the fresh snow outside. Tracks. Not from the rescue earlier, too large, too deliberate, leading toward the trees and vanishing into the dark. Someone had come to the lodge during the storm. Leah hovered behind him. "Should we call someone?" "Who?" Jacob whispered. "The sheriff who plays cards with Crawford every Friday night?" Diesel stepped past him, nose to the ground, following the fading scent until he reached the edge of the porch. He didn't bark, he didn't chase. He just stared into the woods with a stillness sharpened by instinct. Jacob's throat tightened. They didn't just stumble onto something hidden. Someone else wanted it to stay that way. He closed the door quietly and looked at Leah. "Whatever my uncle was protecting, it's not buried. It's waiting." Diesel lifted his head, amber eyes reflecting the firelight, as if confirming what Jacob already felt deep in his bones. The mountain wasn't done with them, and neither was whoever walked across the snow in the dark. The next morning broke without color, just a flat gray stretched over Crystal Rise like the sky was holding back something heavier than snow. Jacob barely slept. The map, the sealed tunnel, the footprints in the storm. All of it circled in his head until one truth stood clearer than the rest. Ben Crawford knew more than he pretended. Jacob drove into town before sunrise, Diesel in the passenger seat, sitting high, eyes fixed on the horizon. When they pulled into the small lot behind Crawford Realty, the lights inside were already on. Ben never slept in, not when there was land to flip and men to intimidate. Jacob stepped out, ignoring the sting of the morning wind. Diesel followed at his heel, ears forward, sensing the tension humming under Jacob's skin. Inside, Ben stood over a map of the valley laid across his desk. He didn't look surprised. "Jacob Harris, early call for a man who hates small talk." Jacob didn't sit. "I'm done talking around things. What do you know about the sealed tunnel on the north cliff?" Ben's jaw twitched, just enough for Jacob to catch it. Then the older man chuckled, low and humorless. "You digging through ghosts now?" Jacob leaned forward. "My uncle died 3 weeks after signing a document about that ridge. He was scared. He left warnings. He left evidence. And you were in every one of them." Ben finally looked up, eyes narrowing. His voice came slower, colder. Ray should have left it alone. "So should you. Some pieces of history aren't meant to be dug up." Jacob didn't flinch. "What were you part of?" Ben hesitated. It was the smallest pause, but Diesel reacted instantly. The dog stepped forward, shoulders tight, reading Ben's shift in heartbeat and tone, the way he once read threats in combat. Ben's gaze flicked to the dog. "You shouldn't bring him everywhere. Makes you brave in all the wrong ways." Jacob didn't blink. "Tell me." Ben exhaled through his nose, then leaned back as if surrendering to a truth he'd avoided for decades. Ridge Vault, asset protection during the Cold War. We built storage points, hidden vaults, insurance for a future everyone prayed wouldn't come. That mountain holds more money than Crystal Rise will ever see. Jacob's chest tightened. Then why hide it? Because the wrong people wanted it. Ben's voice cracked, barely, like he didn't expect the old guilt to still sting, and the right people didn't trust us to keep it safe. Us? Ben straightened, pride slipping into his expression like a bad habit. We were contractors, soldiers on paper, patriots in our own minds. But when the project dissolved, someone had to decide what happened to the assets. So you stole it. Ben didn't deny it. Instead, he lowered his voice. Walk away, Jacob. Ray died because he refused to let things stay buried. And if you keep following his trail, it won't just be your uncle's grave you're standing over. Jacob's muscles coiled, a quiet rage warming the cold in his chest. Diesel growled once, deep and controlled. You shouldn't talk to a man with a war dog like that, Jacob said softly. Ben held his stare for a long moment, then forced a smile, still playing the hero. But heroes die young in these mountains. Jacob turned and walked out before he did something he couldn't take back. Diesel pushed out the door beside him, every step rigid with alertness. Back at the lodge, winter sun scraped across the snow ledge, revealing faint depressions Jacob hadn't noticed before. Diesel stopped at the edge, sniffed hard, then began digging with a determination that pulled Jacob straight out of his thoughts. Something there? Jacob asked. Diesel didn't look back. His paws hit metal. A heavy thud echoed beneath the snow. Jacob dropped to his knees. Together they cleared the drift until a long metal lid appeared, the kind used only for military transport. The latch was intact, sealed tight. Jacob blew out a breath. This shouldn't be here. Diesel barked once, sharp, insistent. Jacob pried the lid open. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of oil, dust, and time. Inside, wrapped in cracked canvas, lay stacks of documents, blueprints, and a metal ledger box. Jacob lifted the blueprints first. They were stamped with official insignias, schematic lines mapping out an underground system carved into the mountain. Operation Ridge Vault. He whispered it like a name he wasn't meant to know. Diesel nudged the ledger box, tapping it lightly with his nose. Jacob opened it and found a notebook inside, its pages yellowed. He flipped through until he found a list of names. Crawford, Miller, Holt. Next to each name, a handwritten note. Compensation distributed, gold reserved, vault incomplete. Jacob froze. This wasn't documentation. It was evidence, proof of a cover-up. Proof of a theft so large it could ruin more than a man's reputation. And Uncle Ray's name was not listed anywhere. They cut him out, Jacob whispered. Or he refused to be part of it. He lifted a final document from the bottom of the crate. A sealed envelope, corners softened from age. Inside was a single photograph of Ben Crawford standing in front of the half-finished vault entrance, shovel in hand, eyes darker than they'd ever been in town. Beside the photo was a statement written in Ray's handwriting. If this reaches Jacob, I didn't die on that ridge by accident. Diesel stepped closer, pressing his head against Jacob's arm, grounding him as the truth settled in. His uncle had been murdered. Snow shifted above them with a soft hiss. Jacob stood fast, scanning the ridge, breath sharp with instinct. Someone had been there again, watching, waiting for him to find the box. Diesel's growl deepened into something primal, warning Jacob before he even saw the movement in the trees. They weren't alone, and now that Jacob had the proof, the mountain wasn't just holding secrets, it was preparing for war. Night settled hard over Hanging Cliff Lodge, the kind of darkness that pressed close and breathed cold along the windows. Jacob sat at the table, maps and blueprints scattered before him. Leah worked beside him, transcribing coordinates into a cleaner layout. Diesel lay near the door, chin on his paws but eyes half open, watching the room the way only a dog molded by war could. The wind outside rose, scraping across the cliff like claws. Jacob didn't like the feel of it. Storm wind spoke one way, this one whispered another. Then Diesel lifted his head. His ears pricked forward. His body went still. A low rumble started in his chest. Jacob looked toward the door just as the lights went out, plunging the lodge into total darkness. Leah gasped. Jacob stood fast. Someone cut the power. Before Jacob could reach for the flashlight, the front door exploded inward. 3 men stormed inside, shapes silhouetted in the doorway, snow swirling around them like ghosts entering a battlefield. Flashlights cut harsh beams across the room. Ben Crawford stepped in behind them, his breath fogging the air, his eyes burning with the cold fury of a man who believed the mountain owed him something. "Evening, Jacob. I told you to stop digging." Jacob didn't answer. Diesel was already a shadow in motion, launching toward the nearest intruder. The dart fired before Diesel reached the man. A sharp click, a hiss, a thud. Diesel yelped and collapsed, sliding across the wood floor, legs buckling beneath him. Leah screamed. Jacob surged forward, but a rifle butt slammed into his ribs, knocking him to the ground. "Tie them!" Ben ordered. Hands grabbed Jacob's arms, twisting them behind his back. Rope bit into his wrists. Leah cried out as another man restrained her, forcing her into a chair. Jacob struggled, but a knee pressed between his shoulder blades, pinning him down. Ben circled the room like he owned it. His voice was controlled, but the edge beneath it was feral. "I gave you a chance to walk away, but you just had to keep pulling secrets out of the ice." Jacob spat blood onto the floor. "This is federal property. You think you'll make it off this mountain with anything?" Ben leaned down until their eyes met. "I already did once, soldier, and the gold you found here is just a fraction of what Ridgevolt hid." He straightened. The other men began overturning furniture, ripping open cabinets, tearing through walls in search of something deeper. "Where's the rest?" Ben asked, voice rising. Ray didn't seal the north tunnel for nothing. He knew what he was guarding. So do you. Jacob didn't speak. Anger coiled inside him, cold and sharp. Behind Ben, Diesel groaned. Jacob froze. The dog's body twitched, his paws flexed, his eyes blinked open, unfocused but burning with instinct. The dart should have knocked him out longer, but Diesel had fought through worse poisons before in Kabul. Sedatives needed time. Diesel refused to give them any. Leah saw it too. Her breath hitched. Jacob met her eyes and gave the slightest nod. Ben didn't notice. He was studying the blueprints on the table, muttering to himself. "It's here. I know it is. Ray hid the conduit entrance under this lodge. The secondary vault has enough gold to buy half the state." One of the intruders knocked over a lantern. The metal clanged loudly on the floor. Outside, the mountains answered with a deep, rolling crack. Leah looked toward the window. Jacob felt the shift in the air like pressure tightening around his ears. "Avalanche," he whispered. The men didn't hear him. Diesel did. The dog pushed up, unsteady but rising, his muscles trembling against the lingering sedative. He locked onto the man nearest Leah and growled. The intruder turned just as Diesel launched. The impact sent the man crashing into Jacob's chair, giving Jacob the leverage he needed. He twisted hard, ripping one wrist free. Pain flared, but adrenaline drowned it out. Ben spun around. "Grab the dog, too late." Diesel clamped onto the man's forearm, dragging him down. Another attacked from behind, but Jacob rose, using the broken chair leg to strike him across the jaw with a crack. The third gunman fired a shot into the ceiling, wood splintering. The echo thundered off the cliffside, vibrating through the mountain. The second crack followed. Closer. Avalanche incoming. Jacob tackled Leah to the floor as snow smashed against the windows, shaking the entire lodge. Diesel released his target and jumped back, just as broken glass sprayed across the room. Wind screamed through the fissure. Ben stumbled as the floor trembled beneath them. A beam overhead groaned and split, sending a shower of dust to the ground. "Get out! Now!" Jacob shouted. Ben aimed his pistol at him, eyes wild. "You're not leaving with what's mine." He pulled the trigger, but the shifting floor threw his aim wide. The bullet buried itself in a support post. Snow roared outside, the sound deepening into something monstrous. The mountain was coming down around them. Diesel lunged again, knocking Ben off balance. Jacob grabbed Leah's wrist and hauled her toward the back door as the front wall buckled from the impact of snow. Ben scrambled toward the table, clutching the blueprints like they were life itself. Another tremor hit. The floor tilted. Diesel barked loudly, demanding, commanding, forcing Jacob and Leah to follow him through the narrow rear hallway. Even half-drugged, he led them with unbroken instinct, weaving between debris as the lodge shook violently. A section of the roof collapsed behind them. Ben's scream echoed through the crashing timber. Jacob didn't look back. They burst out into the blinding snow, where the wind whipped so fiercely it felt like needles against their faces. Diesel shook once, clearing his head, then pressed close to stabilize his footing on the shifting ground. "Follow him!" Jacob yelled. Diesel cut across the ledge, guiding them toward the rocky outcrop that wouldn't collapse under the avalanche's weight. Snow thundered past, swallowing the lodge in a torrent of white. Leah tripped but caught herself on Jacob's arm. He held her upright. Diesel pushed against her legs, urging her forward, keeping her balanced. When the roar finally faded, the silence hit harder than the storm. Jacob looked back. Where the lodge had stood was now a jagged mound of crushed timber and snow. Smoke curled from a broken beam. The front door lay half-buried. No sign of Ben or his men, but the mountain had a way of erasing what it no longer wanted to hold. Leah's breath trembled. Jacob placed a hand on Diesel's back. The dog's chest heaved, exhausted but alive. His eyes gleamed with a fierceness that felt almost human. "You saved us, boy," Jacob murmured. Diesel nudged his hand once, tired but resolute. They stood on the cliff, surrounded by ruin, wind, and the fading remnants of a night that had tried to bury them. But the mountain had failed. Diesel had not. Dawn broke slowly over Hanging Cliff, its light muted by drifting snow and the ragged silence left behind by the avalanche. Jacob stood near the collapsed remains of the lodge, breath steaming, ribs aching, eyes burning from smoke and exhaustion. Leah wrapped her coat tighter, trembling not from the cold, but from everything they had survived. Diesel sat between them, steady as a sentinel, gaze sweeping the tree line. The sedative had mostly worn off, though his legs still shook now and then. But he stayed alert, ears pricked, muscles tight. He knew the threat wasn't fully gone. The first distant rumble of engines echoed across the ridge. Snowmobiles. Leah exhaled in relief. "I think that's Nolan." Jacob nodded. She had pressed her emergency alert earlier, just before Ben's men stormed the lodge. It had been a desperate gesture, one bar of signal blinking on and off. Apparently, it was enough. The engines grew louder until Sheriff Nolan and 2 deputies emerged from the fog, helmets dusted white with frost. They slowed at the edge of the ruins, dismounting quickly when they saw Jacob and Leah alive. "Jesus, Jacob," Nolan muttered, pulling off his helmet. "What happened up here?" Before Jacob could answer, Diesel rose with a sharp growl. 3 figures stumbled from behind a fractured beam, coughing, disoriented. Ben Crawford first, face blooded, coat torn, hands raised in surrender. Behind him limped 2 of his men, bruised and shaken from the collapse. He saw the sheriff and forced a thin smile. "Sheriff Nolan." Glad you're here. There's been a misunderstanding. Diesel surged forward, teeth bared. Jacob caught the dog's harness just in time. Easy, boy. He's done. Nolan's jaw tightened. A misunderstanding? You break into someone's home, assault 2 civilians, knock out a service dog, and start a shootout on a federal mountain? Ben's expression flickered. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jacob stepped forward. He tried to kill us. All of us. And he wasn't here for shelter. He was here for what's buried under this cliff. Nolan frowned. Ben? Is that true? Ben's facade cracked. You don't get it? This whole mountain is holding something that shouldn't have been forgotten. I helped build Ridgevault. I earned my share. Jacob threw the dented steel box onto the snow between them. It burst open slightly, revealing papers and a single sealed blueprint tube. Then Jacob held up the ledger page. This says otherwise. Nolan crouched, flipping through documents. The color drained from his face as he scanned names, dates, distribution logs, and coded entries. This is Cold War era. Department of Defense seals. Asset relocation signatures. What is all this? Jacob answered quietly. Operation Ridgevault, a strategic asset storage program. Your town's history is a little darker than the brochures say. Leah joined them, holding one of the recovered maps. These tunnels weren't for mining. They were designed to store gold reserves, strategic wealth in case of foreign attack. But someone was siphoning off part of the stockpile. Ben stepped forward, despite the rifles pointed at him. We were told it didn't matter. The government had abandoned the project, left everything to rot in the snow. We took what was owed to us. Jacob shot him a stare, so cold it cut deeper than the wind. Ray Harris didn't agree, and that's why you silenced him. For the first time, Ben looked away. Nolan froze. Hold on. Are you telling me Ray didn't fall in that accident back in '84? Jacob nodded once. He found out what they were, planning. He hid the documents, blocked their access to the vault, and paid the price. Leah added, and he left the lodge to Jacob because he knew someone would eventually come looking again. Silence followed. Heavy. Bitter. Nolan stood, eyes hardened with a sheriff's certainty. Crawford, you're under arrest for assault, attempted homicide, conspiracy against federal property, obstruction, and whatever else comes out of this paperwork. 2 deputies stepped forward and cuffed Ben's men. Ben didn't resist when Nolan snapped cuffs onto his wrists. He looked at Jacob one last time. You think you've saved something here? You haven't. Washington will bury this project all over again. They always do. Jacob didn't respond. Diesel did, baring his teeth in a slow, deliberate growl. Ben flinched. Nolan gestured toward the snowmobiles. Get them out of here. Call Federal Liaison. Tell them to send a full investigative team and get Mountain Rescue on standby. This site is unstable. As the sheriff approached Jacob, his tone softened. You did everything right. This could have gone much worse. Jacob looked at Diesel, who leaned gently against his leg. He saved us. All of us. Nolan nodded. I'll mention that in the report. When the sheriff and his deputies disappeared into the swirl of snow with the prisoners, the ridge grew quiet again. Leah knelt beside Diesel, brushing snow from his fur. He nudged her hand, tired but proud. Jacob stood over the fractured remains of the lodge, breathing deeply, letting the cold settle his racing thoughts. It was over, but not finished. The truth was out, but not yet told. And the mountain, once suffocating with secrets, now felt like it was finally exhaling. Jacob rested a hand on Diesel's head. We're not done, boy. Not yet. Diesel looked up, amber eyes steady and knowing. The real reckoning had only begun. The wind on Hanging Cliff used to scream through the rafters, claw at the shingles, rattle every window with the voice of something old and unsettled. But a year after the avalanche, the cliffside carried a different sound. Calmer, warmer, as if the mountain had finally released the breath it had been holding for decades. Jacob's rebuilt lodge stood proudly on its foundations again, beams replaced, stonework reinforced, windows framed with thick cedar. The scars of the collapse were gone, but the memory of the night remained in every board he had hammered himself, not as a wound, but as a promise. Inside, the fire crackled quietly. Diesel lay in his usual spot beside the hearth, stretched long across a handmade rug Leah insisted they buy. His fur glowed in the firelight, silvering at the edges now. He wasn't young anymore, but he carried his age like a medal. Veterans who visited the lodge often paused just to sit with him. Some talked, some didn't. Diesel accepted both with the same steady presence, a silent anchor in a world of shifting ground. They called him the Sentinel of the Cliff. And he earned every bit of the title. Jacob stepped out of the workshop carrying a crate of tools, wiping sawdust off his arms. Mornings were his favorite time now, not because they were easy, but because they were purposeful. Today he was repairing the north railing with 2 vets from Fort Carson, both in their 20s, both carrying more quiet pain than they knew how to speak aloud. Leah walked up the hill from town, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a stack of children's drawings poking out the top. She waved when she saw Jacob. "They made you superheroes again," she said, laughing softly. Jacob glanced at the sketches. One drawing showed him, Leah, and Diesel standing on the cliff with bright capes fluttering behind them. Diesel's cape was the biggest. "Well, the dog deserves it," Jacob said. "I'm just the guy with a hammer." Leah nudged him with her shoulder. "Good thing they didn't draw you with 2 left thumbs." He grinned, a rare, easy expression he had relearned in this place. It felt right on him now, earned, not borrowed. Inside the lodge, a new group of veterans sat in the common room drinking coffee. Some stared out the window at the vast sweep of pine. Others kicked off their boots near the fire, letting warmth soften the tension in their shoulders. Hanging Cliff Lodge had become a sanctuary. Not a clinic, not a retreat, but a place where nobody had to pretend strength or swallow weakness. A place where silence wasn't a threat, but an invitation. Diesel lifted his head when a young Marine entered hesitantly, rubbing a shaking hand through his hair. The dog stood, padded over, and pressed his head into the man's leg. The Marine exhaled, the breath breaking halfway, and slowly lowered himself to the floor to sit with Diesel. No words exchanged. None needed. Jacob watched from the doorway. "That's his real skill," he whispered. Leah nodded. "Some dogs are trained. Diesel chooses." Throughout the lodge, reminders of the past blended gently with the new purpose the building had claimed. A framed set of coordinates from the Ridgevault vault hung near the entrance, not as a trophy, but as memory. Ray Harris's letter was preserved behind glass, and in the rebuilt north wall, Jacob had set 1 stone from the avalanche wreckage, a quiet acknowledgement of everything the mountain had taken and everything it had given back. In the afternoons, Jacob taught skills out back behind the lodge. Not formal classes, but lessons that mattered. How to repair a generator, how to use tools safely, how to steady trembling hands with steady work. He spoke little, demonstrated often, and let the vets learn at their own pace. Leah taught reading and writing at the little school in Crystal Rise, but twice a week she hiked up the ridge to teach mountain kids in the big common room of the lodge. They adored her. They adored Diesel more, swarming him with sticky hands and wide smiles until he finally sighed, accepted his fate, and lay down like a living pillow fortress. Jacob liked those days, loved them, secretly. The laughter bouncing off the stone walls sounded exactly like what the mountain had been missing for years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the cliff in a wash of gold and amber, Jacob and Leah sat on the porch drinking coffee. Diesel sprawled between them, tail tapping lightly against the wood. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Leah asked. Jacob took a long breath before answering. "I did once. Not anymore." She looked at him, waiting. Jacob glanced at the rebuilt lodge, the smoke drifting gently from the chimney, the warm lights glowing behind the windows. Then he looked at Diesel, who lifted his head just enough to meet Jacob's eyes with a steady, knowing gaze. "This is the first place in years," Jacob said quietly, "where leaving feels like losing something." Leah rested her hand on Diesel's back. "He's the one who brought us all here." Jacob nodded. "He found the vault, the truth, the map, everything we needed. But more than that, he found the part of me I thought was gone." The wind shifted, soft and warm, brushing the cliffside gently. For the first time in decades, Hanging Cliff wasn't holding secrets. It was holding people, healing them, teaching them how to breathe again. And Diesel, the guardian of the ridge, watched it all with calm, ancient eyes. The mountain no longer howled. It finally listened. The sun rose slowly over Hanging Cliff, washing the lodge in soft gold. It should have been a quiet morning, the kind Jacob had grown to rely on. But the sound of engines grinding up the dirt road broke the stillness long before he stepped onto the porch with a mug of black coffee. 3 SUVs crawled up the slope, tires crunching over frost. Doors opened. People spilled out. Cameras, microphones, jackets with national network logos. Leah stepped out behind Jacob, eyebrows raised. "You expecting company?" she asked. Jacob exhaled. "Not this kind." Diesel appeared at his side, alert but calm, his gaze tracking the group with the steady discipline of a soldier who'd never forgotten his training. He didn't bark. He simply stood, ready. A woman in a navy coat approached first. Sarah Lynn, the reporter who had written the first feature about the lodge months ago. Today she wasn't alone. "Morning, Jacob," she said with a warm nod. "I hope this isn't too much." The story. It grew. Behind her, a cameraman was already adjusting his rig, and 2 more journalists were unloading equipment. Jacob swallowed a groan and stepped aside. "All right," he said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it outside. He doesn't like bright lights." Sarah glanced at Diesel, who stared back with measured composure. "That's fair," she said. They settled on the porch steps. A camera rolled. The wind moved softly between the pines. Jacob sat with Diesel leaning into his leg, the dog's body heat grounding him more than anything else could. Sarah began with the usual questions. The avalanche, the ambush, the vault, Ben Crawford's arrest. Somehow, Jacob kept his voice steady. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He told the truth slowly, as if laying stones back in place. Then Sarah shifted, her voice gentler. "There's something America keeps asking, Jacob. Why did Diesel dig that night? Why keep going when every instinct should have led him back to safety?" Jacob looked down at the dog beside him. Diesel watched him quietly, patient, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Jacob inhaled. The words rose like they'd been waiting. "Diesel didn't dig for gold," he said. "He dug for peace." The porch fell silent. Even the wind paused. Sarah lowered her pen slightly. "Jacob, that's going to hit people hard. It's the truth." Diesel nudged his hand, and Jacob's voice softened. He wasn't looking for treasure. He was looking for what we'd lost. Stability. Safety. A world that didn't ask him to fight anymore. He dug because he believed something better was buried under all that snow. And he was right. The cameraman swallowed. Leah blinked rapidly, pretending it was the wind stinging her eyes. Sarah recovered her voice. "There's a bill moving through Congress. You know about it? Something about service dogs? It's unofficially being called the Diesel Act, PTSD canine support for any veteran who needs one. Funded nationally." Jacob stared at her, stunned. Diesel tilted his head as if wondering why no one was scratching his ears. "That dog saved more than one life on this mountain," Sarah added. "People noticed." Before Jacob could reply, a hesitant voice piped up from behind the reporters. Mr. Harris?" A small boy stood near the porch steps. Maybe 11. Thin jacket, cheeks red from the climb. Jacob recognized him from town. "Hey, kid," Jacob said. "You walk up here alone? My sister's with the reporters. I heard you found a treasure, and my friend said you fought bad guys. And I wanted to ask—" He swallowed hard, eyes drifting to Diesel. "How'd you find it? The vault, I mean." Jacob looked down at Diesel again. Then he pointed. "You're asking the wrong guy. Ask him." Diesel blinked. Tail swept once across the porch. The boy's face lit up like someone had turned on a lantern inside him. "Can I pet him?" he whispered. Jacob nodded. "If he lets you." Diesel stepped forward on his own, lowering his head so the boy could reach. The child placed a trembling hand on the ridge of the dog's neck. Diesel leaned into it with gentle confidence, as if telling the kid he'd been waiting for that question all along. Reporters watched silently. No one lifted a camera. Jacob felt something warm loosen in his chest. The boy looked up again, his voice steadier now. "Is he like a hero?" Jacob didn't smile. "Not exactly, it was softer than that. He's a soldier," he said, "and a healer, and sometimes the only one who knows where the truth is buried." The boy nodded solemnly, like he'd been entrusted with something sacred. As the interview wrapped, Sarah closed her notebook and shook Jacob's hand. "Thank you for speaking," she said. "People need stories like his. Makes them believe in second chances." Jacob glanced at Diesel, who lay on the porch, eyes half open, listening to wind and footsteps and the quiet beat of a mountain at peace. "He's earned more than a second chance," Jacob said. "He gave me mine." The cameras left. The engines faded. Quiet settled again across Hanging Cliff Lodge. Diesel rose, stretched, and nudged Jacob's thigh. Jacob looked down, understanding immediately. "All right, boy, let's go. Show me what you're thinking." And together, man and dog stepped back into the cold, steady silence of the ridge, where truth had always waited for the right set of paws to uncover it. The sun dipped low behind Hanging Cliff, spilling its last light across the ridge like molten copper. Evening always came earlier up here. Shadows stretched long over the lodge roof, across the railing Jacob had rebuilt, board by board, and onto the porch where the three of them sat in quiet companionship. Jacob on the top step, elbows resting on his knees. Leah beside him, wrapped in a wool sweater, hair catching the dying light. And Diesel lying at their feet, old but unbroken, chest rising slow and steady. The mountain breathed with them. Diesel's muzzle had faded almost entirely to grey. His joints stiffened more on cold mornings, and his naps grew longer. But his eyes, those sharp amber eyes that once cut through blizzards and fear, still held that same unwavering clarity, as if he could see things the rest of them only sensed. Leah nudged Jacob gently. "He's getting older," she whispered. Jacob ran a hand over Diesel's head, feeling the familiar ridges of muscle beneath thinning fur. "I know." Diesel lifted his head, pressed it into Jacob's palm. The same gesture he made the night Jacob returned to the lodge, broken and lost. The same gesture he made before charging into an avalanche's shadow. The same gesture that had pulled Jacob back into himself. "He's not done," Jacob said. "Not yet." The sky shifted. Deep orange melted into plum. The wind carried the faint smell of pine smoke from the lodge chimney. Far off, a hawk cried over the ridge. Everything felt still, as if the mountain itself had settled in to listen. Leah leaned forward, her voice soft. Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all of this? Jacob didn't answer immediately. He didn't have to. The memory lived in every nail of the porch, every stone of the rebuilt wall. It lived in Diesel's scarred flank, and in the silence that hung between breaths. Finally he spoke. Some things are worth digging for, even in a storm. Diesel's ears twitched at the word dig, his gaze shifting to Jacob with a ghost of the old fire. Jacob chuckled. Even now, huh? He murmured, always looking, always knowing. He found the vault, the evidence, the truth behind his uncle's death. He saved Leah. Saved me. Saved the whole damn mountain in his own way. Jacob let the silence stretch, heavy but warm. Then he whispered what had been growing in his chest for months. He didn't dig for fortune. He dug for purpose. Leah looked at him, eyes softening. You should write that down. Jacob shook his head. No need. He already lived it. Diesel shifted, laying his head on Jacob's boot. A simple gesture, but one that said everything. Below them, the forest rustled with the early sigh of nightfall. Lights flickered on inside the lodge. Through the window, silhouettes of veterans moved slowly, quietly. People healing because this place existed. Because Diesel led Jacob here. Because truth had been buried, then unearthed by pores that refused to stop. One of Leah's students had drawn a picture earlier that week. It hung on the lodge wall now. Diesel standing on the cliff, tail high, snow swirling around him like he controlled the weather. The caption, written in shaky pencil, read, "The dog who found the truth." Jacob didn't believe in legends, but this one felt earned. Leah rested her head on his shoulder. You think he knows? Jacob looked down at Diesel. The dog looked back, eyes unblinking, ancient with understanding. Yeah, Jacob said quietly. He knows. The sun slipped behind the ridge. Darkness softened the sky. The porch light clicked on, casting a warm halo around them. Jacob exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the past year settle into the wood beneath him. Every hardship, every storm, every revelation, all leading to this gentle quiet. He looked toward the camera in his mind, toward the millions who would one day hear this story. If you're listening out there, he said under his breath, barely moving his lips, just know this. Healing doesn't always come from the loud places. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws without a word. Diesel's tail thumped once, the sound small but full of everything. Jacob smiled. What's your story with a loyal pet? He let the question float into the fading light. A bridge from their porch to every home watching. An invitation. A reminder. Leah took Jacob's hand. Diesel pressed closer, warm against their legs. The mountain grew dark. The lodge lights glowed like a beacon for anyone wandering too far, too long. And in that moment, quiet as snow settling on pine, a final truth rose in Jacob's chest. Some dogs only guard, but some change the world. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel, where loyalty is still alive, where purpose runs deeper than gold, and where every tale honors the silent heroes who stand beside us. Diesel lifted his head one last time at the horizon, eyes bright as ever. A soldier, a guardian, a legend on a cliff,